Stop wasting time on easy definition questions. If you can't solve these complex IAM policy scenarios, you aren't ready for the real AWS SAA-C03 exam. Today, we're testing your security knowledge with the hardest exam-style questions that trip up most candidates. Let's see if you can pass. A company has e-commerce two-tier web application. Application's front end is deployed on a fleet of EC2 instances with auto-scaling group, and application's backend use Amazon RDS MySQL database. The traffic to the application spikes during the promotion periods, especially in the Black Friday. The database is unable to keep up with the front-end connection requests. What is the best cost-optimized solution to handle this issue? The options are A. Redesign the current architecture using Amazon API Gateway with AWS Lambda. B. Change the instance types to C4.large instances. C. Decouple the two tiers using Amazon SQS. D. Redesign the current architecture using the API using Amazon API Gateway and integrate the new API with the existing backend service. This question tests your ability to handle database connection saturation during traffic spikes. The problem isn't compute capacity, it's that the RDS MySQL database can't handle the burst of direct connections from the EC2 frontend. You need a solution that buffers requests and prevents overwhelming the database while staying cost-effective. Correct answer, C. Decouple the two tiers using Amazon SQS. Amazon SQS acts as a message queue buffer between your EC2 frontend and RDS backend. When traffic spikes, requests queue up in SQS instead of hammering the database directly. Your backend processes messages at a steady rate the database can handle, preventing connection exhaustion. This is cost optimized because you only pay for messages processed and you don't need to over-provision RDS capacity for peak periods. Why other options are wrong? Option A, complete re-architecture with Lambda is expensive, time-consuming, and overkill when the issue is just connection management, not cost optimized for this specific problem. Option B, changing EC2 instance types doesn't solve database connection limits. The bottleneck is at the RDS layer, not front-end compute capacity. Option D, API Gateway alone doesn't decouple or buffer requests to the database. It still results in direct connections that will overwhelm RDS during spikes. Quick memory tip, database drowning, queue it up. When RDS can't keep up with connections, think SQS decoupling equals smooth traffic flow at database's own pace. SQS equals shock absorber for spikes. A trading company has a back-end API service to serve multiple clients. This service is running on multiple EC2 instances behind application load balancer. Most of the client requests finish very quickly, but some requests takes a longer time to complete, which causes client timeouts and increasing overall system latency. How can this issue be corrected? The options are A, use compute-optimized EC2 instances, i.e. C5.1x large. B, write the long-running requests on Amazon SQS to be processed asynchronous C. Use caching layer to handle the long-running requests. D, add more EC2 instances to distribute the workload. This question tests your understanding of asynchronous processing patterns for mixed workloads. The problem is that slow requests block resources and cause timeouts, affecting the overall user experience, even though most requests are fast. You need to separate long-running tasks from quick API responses to prevent bottlenecks. Correct answer, B. Write the long-running requests on Amazon SQS to be processed asynchronous. Why B is correct? Amazon SQS enables asynchronous processing of long-running requests. When a slow request arrives, the API immediately acknowledges it, writes the task to SQS, and returns a tracking ID to the client. Backend workers pick up messages from the queue and process them independently without blocking the main API. This eliminates timeouts, reduces latency for fast requests, and improves overall system responsiveness. Why other options are wrong? Option A, compute-optimized instances improve processing speed but don't eliminate client timeouts. Slow requests still block synchronous API calls regardless of instance power. Option C, caching helps with repetitive read requests, but long-running requests, like complex calculations or reports, can't be cached before they're computed the first time. Option D, adding more EC2 instances distributes load but doesn't solve the fundamental problem. Slow requests will still cause timeouts and tie up worker threads on any instance. Quick memory tip, long task? Don't wait, queue it. When requests have mixed speeds, think SQS async pattern equals fast response now, slow work later. SQS equals separate the slow from the flow. If this video is helping you, support us by hitting the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Several Amazon EC2 Spot instances are being used to process messages from an Amazon SQS queue and store results in an Amazon DynamoDB table. Shortly after picking up a message from the queue, AWS terminated the Spot instance. The Spot instance had not finished processing the message. What will happen to the message? The options are A. The message will remain in the queue and be immediately picked up by another instance. B. The message will become available for processing again after the visibility timeout expires. C. The message will be lost as it would have been deleted from the queue when processed. D. The results may be duplicated in DynamoDB as the message will likely be processed multiple times. This question tests your understanding of SQS visibility timeout behavior when message processing fails or is interrupted. The scenario involves Spot instance termination, unpredictable interruption during active message processing. You need to know what happens to an SQS message when a consumer fails to delete it before the visibility timeout expires. Correct answer, B. The message will become available for processing again after the visibility timeout expires. Why B is correct? When an SQS message is received by a consumer, it becomes invisible to other consumers for the duration of the visibility timeout, default 30 seconds. If the consumer successfully processes the message, it explicitly deletes it from the queue. However, if the Spot instance gets terminated before deletion, the message is never removed. Once the visibility timeout expires, SQS automatically makes the message visible again in the queue, allowing another healthy consumer to pick it up and retry processing. This ensures messages aren't lost due to consumer failures. Why other options are wrong? Option A. The message does not become immediately available. It must wait for the full visibility timeout period to expire before reappearing in the queue. Option C. Messages are only deleted when the consumer explicitly calls the delete operation after successful processing. Termination prevents this, so the message remains in the queue. Option D. While duplicate processing is a valid concern with SQS, at least once delivery. This option doesn't answer what happens to the message itself. It describes a consequence, not the mechanism. Quick memory tip: no delete, message reset. SQS messages only disappear when explicitly deleted. If processing fails, the visibility clock expires and the message reappears for retry. Think visibility timeout equals disappearing act timer. You are a solutions architect at a travel agency, and you need to give secure access for the development team to the web servers, which reside in a private subnet and not accessible from the internet. The web servers must be accessed via SSH connectivity, originated from the corporate network only. What are the required steps to provide this secure access? Choose 2. The options are A. Configure inbound network ACL to accept all SSH traffic from the corporate network. B. Create IAM roles with least permission to access to web servers and assign to Bastion host C. Create IAM user with permission to access to web servers and assign to Bastion host. D. Create a Bastion host with security group rules that only allow traffic from the corporate network. E. Open an SSH port on the security group for web servers and set the source to Bastion host. This question tests your knowledge of Bastion host architecture for secure SSH access to private subnet resources. The key requirement is SSH access must originate from the corporate network only, not public internet, and web servers are in a private subnet, no direct internet access. You need to identify the 2 configuration steps that create a secure jump server pattern with proper security group rules. Correct answer, D. Create a Bastion host with security group rules that only allow traffic from the corporate network, E. Open an SSH port on the security group for web servers and set the source to Bastion host. Why D and E are correct? Option D establishes the first layer of security by deploying a Bastion host, jump server, in a public subnet with a security group that restricts inbound SSH, port 22, to only the corporate network's IP range. This prevents unauthorized internet access. Option E creates the second security layer by configuring the private web server security group to accept SSH connections only from the Bastion host security group or its private IP, ensuring private instances remain isolated from direct external access. Together, these create a secure 2-hop SSH path: corporate network, Bastion host, private web servers. Why other options are wrong? Option A. Network ACLs are stateless and operate at the subnet level. They're too broad and not the preferred method for fine-grained SSH access control. Security groups are better suited. Option B. IAM roles control AWS API access, not SSH connectivity. SSH uses key pairs and security groups, not IAM permissions for OS-level access. Option C. Same issue as B. IAM users don't grant SSH access to EC2 instances. SSH requires key pairs and proper security group configuration. Quick memory tip: Bastion equals two-layer lock. Corporate network: Bastion SG first lock. Private server SG references Bastion second lock. Think SG chaining source one SG from another. A trading platform is using AWS Lambda with Amazon RDS database to perform simple data processing. The security team has a lot of concerns about storing passwords in Lambda functions due to compliance requirements. What is the most secure method to enable the Lambda function to retrieve the database password? Choose two. The options are A. AWS Secrets Manager. B. AWS Parameter Store. C. Replace the encrypted password with hashed password. D. Create IAM roles with database access permissions and assign it to Lambda function. This question tests your knowledge of secure credential management for Lambda functions accessing databases. The key requirement is avoiding hard-coded passwords in Lambda code or environment variables while meeting compliance standards. You need to identify AWS services specifically designed for storing and retrieving sensitive credentials like database passwords. Correct answer: A. AWS Secrets Manager. B. AWS Parameter Store. Why A and B are correct? AWS Secrets Manager is purpose-built for storing sensitive credentials like database passwords with encryption enabled by default using AWS KMS. It offers automatic password rotation for RDS databases and cross-account secret sharing. AWS Systems Manager Parameter Store can also securely store database credentials using the secure string type with KMS encryption. Standard parameters in Parameter Store are free, making it cost-effective for simple use cases. Both services allow Lambda functions to retrieve credentials at runtime via SDK calls with proper IAM permissions, eliminating hard-coded passwords. Lambda can use the AWS Parameter and Secrets Lambda extension to cache retrieved values and improve performance. Why other options are wrong? Option C. Hashing passwords makes them one-way and unusable. You cannot unhash to get the original password for database authentication. Hashing is for password verification, not storage for later use. Option D. IAM roles control AWS API access, not RDS database authentication. RDS still requires username, password, or IAM database authentication tokens, but this option doesn't address secure password retrieval. Quick memory tip: secrets in the vault, not in the code. For DB passwords, Secrets Manager, auto rotation, premium features, or Parameter Store, free simple. Both equals encrypted KMS secrets that Lambda fetches at runtime, never hardcode. If this video is helping you, support us by hitting the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. A solutions architect created a new IAM user account for a temporary employee who recently joined the company. The user does not have permissions to perform any actions. Which statement is true about newly created users in IAM? The options are A. They are created with user privileges. B. They are created with full permissions. C. They are created with limited permissions. D. They are created with no permissions. This question tests your understanding of the default permission model in AWS IAM when creating new users. AWS follows the security principle of implicit deny by default, meaning no actions are permitted unless explicitly allowed. You need to know the starting security posture for brand new IAM users before any policies are attached. Correct answer: D. They are created with no permissions. Why D is correct? By default, a newly created IAM user has no permissions to do anything. They are not authorized to perform any AWS operations or access any AWS resources. AWS follows the security principle of implicit deny by default, restricting all actions for all identities except the root user. To grant permissions, you must explicitly attach IAM policies directly to the user, add them to a group with policies, or copy permissions from an existing user. This approach follows the principle of least privilege, ensuring users only receive the minimum permissions necessary for their role. Why other options are wrong? Option A. User privileges is vague and incorrect. New users have zero privileges until explicitly granted through policy attachments. Option B. Granting full permissions by default would violate AWS security best practices and create massive security risks. Only the root account has unrestricted access by default. Option C. New users don't even have limited permissions. They start with absolutely no access at all, which is more restrictive than limited. Quick memory tip. New user equals blank slate. AWS IAM follows implicit deny by default. New users have zero permissions until you attach policies. Remember, no policy equals no access. Start secure, add as needed. The AWS Acceptable Use Policy describes permitted and prohibited behavior on AWS and includes descriptions of prohibited security violations and network abuse. According to the policy, what is AWS's position on penetration testing? The options are A. AWS do not allow any form of penetration testing. B. AWS allow penetration testing by customers on their own VPC resources. C. AWS allow penetration for some resources without prior authorization. D. AWS allow penetration testing for all resources. This question tests your knowledge of AWS's penetration testing policy and what customers are allowed to do for security assessments. The key is understanding AWS's current policy that permits testing on specific services without needing advance approval from AWS. You need to recognize the balance between customer security testing rights and protecting AWS shared infrastructure. Correct answer, C. AWS allow penetration for some resources without prior authorization. Why C is correct? AWS allows customers to conduct penetration testing on specific permitted services without prior approval. The permitted services include Amazon EC2 instances, RDS, CloudFront, Aurora, API Gateway, Lambda, Lightsail, Elastic Beanstalk, ECS, Fargate, OpenSearch, FSX, and Transit Gateway. Customers can perform security assessments like port scanning, vulnerability scanning, web application scanning, exploitation, injections, and fuzzing on these resources. However, certain activities remain prohibited, including DDoS attacks, except under Special DDoS Simulation Policy, DNS zone walking through Route 53, protocol flooding, port flooding, and request flooding. Testing S3 hosted applications is allowed, but directly targeting S3 buckets themselves is strictly prohibited. Why other options are wrong? Option A, completely incorrect. AWS explicitly allows penetration testing on many services without approval. Option B, too narrow. The policy isn't limited to VPC resources only. It covers specific AWS services across compute, database, networking, and serverless categories. Option D, too broad. AWS does not allow testing on all resources. AWS managed infrastructure like hypervisors, physical hosts, and some services require approval or are prohibited entirely. Quick memory tip, some services yes, all services equals no. AWS permits pen testing on a specific list, EC2, RDS, Lambda, etc., without asking first, but not everything. Remember, permitted list exists equals option C. To get the free PDF, simply watch this full video. As you watch, you'll see the progress bar generating your PDF in real time. Once the video is almost complete, the download button unlocks automatically. No forms, no sign up, just learn first, then download.